Today we continue with Dave Barry's Class Clown, the memoirs of a professional wise ass. Continuing now with chapter 2, beginning chapter 2 actually, which is entitled School. I began my education at Wampus Elementary, a public school that is still in operation, educating the youth of Armonk. Wampus comes from the Native American word wampus, which means, as far as I've been able to determine, wampus. I started kindergarten in 1952. Harry Truman was the president. We were deep into the Cold War with the Russians. The nuclear arms race was on. Not long after the 1952 school year began, the United States tested the first hydrogen bomb, which was such big news that we even heard about it on the Wampus Elementary playground. I remember older kids more excited than scared, running around shouting, H-bomb! Atomic war was part of the school curriculum in the 50s, most notably in the form of the famous duck and cover drills, in which we students would practice crawling under our desks to protect ourselves in the event of a nuclear blast. I did that. I was part of that just a few years after Dave. He started kindergarten in 52. I started in the spring of 57. I started first grade in the fall of 57. I think I started kindergarten back then kindergarten was not something that was mandated, wasn't part of the public school system. We really did that. It seems pretty stupid now, but back then, when the threat of nuclear attack felt very real, it also seemed pretty stupid. I think we all knew deep in our hearts that school desks did not provide meaningful protection against atomic bombs. If they did, why not erect giant school desks over major cities? But we didn't really mind the duck and cover drills. They were more entertaining than, for example, school. Some people built home fallout shelters, which were a thing for a while in the 50s and early 60s. I didn't know anybody who had one. My family certainly didn't. My dad had his hands full just providing us with a regular shelter. But I did briefly have a survival kit. This was a collection of items that would theoretically help keep you alive in the event of a nuclear war. I don't remember where I got the idea for it, but I definitely remember when I was maybe 10 or 11, putting a bunch of stuff into one of my dad's old toolboxes and lugging it around. I also remember that my mom found this amusing. I believe my survival kit included a flashlight, some matches, and a penknife. But the items I definitely remember were 2 Hershey bars, which I apparently thought would provide me with vital sustenance in the radioactive hellscape that Armonk would be reduced to following an exchange of nuclear missiles with the Russians. As it happened, and whether or not this was a direct result of my assembling a survival kit, we may never know, the Russians failed to attack Armonk. So after a day or two of lugging my toolbox around, I ate the Hershey bars. They were just sitting there going to waste. And that was pretty much the end of my organized efforts to survive. The other scary thing I remember from my early school days was polio, or poliomyelitis, an incurable, highly contagious disease that attacked children and could cause paralysis and death. There was a polio epidemic in the early 50s, and the grown-ups were terrified. And personally, my cousin Devin had polio. I remember he wore braces on his legs for a time. Our parents tried to hide their fears from us, but we heard them talking about it, about families they knew that had been stricken, about what they should do to protect us. They worried about whether and where to let us play, worried if our playmates caught colds, worried a lot if we caught colds. We were just kids, but we felt their worry. Then in 1952, Dr. Jonas Salk created a vaccine that prevented polio. That was the good news. The bad news, for me it was very bad news indeed, was the way this vaccine was administered. A shot. On a warm and sunny day in May of 1954, I was in first grade All the students of Wampus Elementary were lined up on the playground. One by one, we were taken into the cafeteria, where Dr. Mortimer Monty Cone was waiting with a needle the size of a harpoon. Or so it seemed to me. I hate needles. I have hated them all my life. Over the years, I have, following a shot or blood draw, wound up unconscious on the floor of more than one medical facility. And while today I am deeply grateful to Dr. Salk for creating the vaccine and Dr. Cone for injecting it into me, my experience that May day on the Wampus Elementary playground, standing in that long line, moving forward one grim step at a time toward a fate that I viewed as way worse than either polio or death, will forever be a big wad of scar tissue in the bad memories lobe of my brain. The polio shots were big news all over the country. The North Castle Villager, a newspaper that covered Armonk, ran a story on May 6, 1954 about the vaccinations at Wampus Elementary. The headline reads, "A lark, says kids as polio shots begin." I imagine whoever wrote that headline is dead, but if he or she or they are still alive, and he or she or they happen to be reading this, let me just say to him or her or them, with all due respect, you lying liar. Perhaps not every child getting a shot that day was as big a baby as I was, but nobody thought it was a lark. And even if we had enjoyed it, none of us, I speak for my generation here, would ever have used the term lark. The Villager article begins as follows. Hesitation gave way to curiosity and then to pride this week as hundreds of northern Westchester schoolchildren found there's really nothing to taking the Salk anti-polio shots. A few lips may have quivered at first, and there was a little doubt here and there as to just what the needle would feel like. But afterward, it was all smiles. Again, with all due respect, it was not all smiles, you lying newspaper liar who clearly was not there. The Villager article continues. The second round of shots will be given next week, and the final set 4 weeks later. Half of the children received the vaccine, the other half a harmless control fluid. Study after the polio season will show the effectiveness of the vaccine. Only children in grades 1 through 3 are receiving the shots. Almost a year later, the Villager printed the names of the students who got the vaccine. My sister's name was among them, as were the names of many of my classmates, but my name was missing. I had been given the, quote, harmless control fluid, which meant that I had to get more shots. I had to get twice as many shots as my sister. I think this at least partly explains why I ended up being an atheist. Anyway, aside from polio and nuclear war, elementary school was a pretty good experience. I learned to read and write, useful skills that I still sometimes employ. My first reading textbooks were the famous Dick and Jane series. Mine too. Starring the two wholesome-looking youngsters afflicted with some kind of nervous tic that caused them to speak like actors in the climactic scene of a porn movie. Dick said, "Oh, Jane. Oh, oh, oh." Jane said, "Yes, Dick. Yes, yes, yes." Dick said, "Oh, my God, Jane." I'm a little surprised that, "Oh, my God," it worked its way in. That would have seemed a little sacrilegious, I think. He continues, "I also learned to add and subtract, which turned out to be the only math skills I have ever really needed in adult life. And to be honest, I have done very little subtracting. I made art projects out of construction paper and this white paste. You boomers remember this paste. Yes, it turned out to be delicious. No, I never ate it, no. I enjoyed eating that paste way more than I enjoyed eating the Wampus Elementary cafeteria food, which came from giant government cans left over from some previous war, possibly the French and Indian. The best part of elementary school was recess, which is when we students were released onto the playground to swing on the swings, slide on the slides, chase each other around, throw things, and pretend to be Davy Crockett. That was the first big fad I remember. Davy Crockett was a rifle-toting, bear-shooting, coonskin cap-wearing, Alamo-dying, franchise-anchoring frontiersperson who was the subject of a 1954 miniseries on the Walt Disney's Disneyland TV show. We all watched that show, and we all knew the Davy Crockett song. So did I, and I had a coonskin cap. although I was a little bit later than Dave to it. Davy Crockett, king of the wild frontier. I had a Davy Crockett t-shirt, which I wore whenever possible. On the Wampus Elementary playground at recess, we boys reenacted the scene from the final episode of the TV series wherein Davy Crockett makes his courageous last stand, fighting off the Mexican attackers at the Alamo. Disney didn't show him actually dying. The episode fades out with actor Fess Parker having run out of bullets, swinging his rifle at the Mexicans, looking like a man practicing with a 9-iron. In our playground reenactment, the part of the Alamo was played by a largest boulder that had a flat top so you could stand on it. The problem was that everybody wanted to play the part of Davy Crockett. I certainly did. After all, I had the name and the t-shirt. Nobody wanted to be the Mexicans. So basically our reenactment consisted of a group of small boys standing around on a rock trying to look heroic in the face of an attacking horde of invisible Mexicans. In the interest of not getting bogged down in a boomer 50s TV nostalgia wallow, Howdy Doody, Lassie, Winky Dink, I will fast forward to 5th grade, which I spent at Whippoorwill School, a stately 1924 red brick building that once was Armonc's only public school and is now a condominium where, according to Zillow, a 2-bedroom unit will run you north of $700,000. Before I continue with his talk about 5th grade here, I'll show you this picture. This, he says, is captioned, "My 2nd grade school photo." So this is Dave Barry in 2nd grade. It amuses me thinking that people have paid that kind of money, $700,000, to inhabit spaces where my classmates and I once sat at uncomfortable, graffiti-scarred desks, staring at mimeographed. All you boomers who to this very day vividly remember the smell of a freshly made mimeograph, raise your hands. Yeah, I see you. Yeah, I did. Purple mimeograph. Yeah. Ink. Staring at mimeograph test pages in Mrs. DeLucia's class, desperately trying to remember the capital of Vermont, Montpelier. The big news thing that happened while I was in 5th grade was Sputnik. Okay, that happened right near the beginning of my 1st grade year. Sputnik. Here's a footnote. Dave graciously gives us this footnote. Sputnik is Russian for little sput. Okay. All right. That was the Earth's first man-made satellite, which the Russians launched into orbit in October of 1957. And oh boy, did it ever upset the grown-ups. Until Sputnik, we Americans just assumed we were technologically superior to the Russians. Why not? We had nicer cars. We had way more television sets. Some Americans even had color TV. Not many. Not at that time. Not many shows were in color at the time. That's me talking, not Dave. Granted, the color rendering was terrible, so the people on TV all appeared to have fatal skin disorders. But still, the Russians didn't even have color TV. So how could they send up a working satellite before we did? Yes, Sputnik was a major blow to America's self-esteem, but we are not a nation of quitters. Just as Davy Crockett did not quit whacking Mexicans at the Alamo until he was dead, the United States of America did not quit the space race. On December 6, 1957, less than 2 months after the Sputnik launch, I stop here to say that's inaccurate. It's a little over 2 months after the Sputnik launch, because that was on October 4th. This is on December 6th. Anyway, a team of American scientists, engineers, military personnel, and civilian officials gathered in Cape Canaveral to watch the launch of America's first satellite. Here's the Wikipedia account of what happened. The booster ignited and began to rise, but about 2 seconds after liftoff, after rising about 1.2 meters, 4 feet, the rocket lost thrust and fell back to the launch pad. As it settled, the fuel tanks ruptured and exploded, destroying the rocket and severely damaging the launch pad. The Vanguard 1A satellite was thrown clear and landed on the ground a short distance away, with its transmitter still sending out a beacon signal. That's right. While Sputnik was hundreds of miles overhead, hurtling along at 18,000 miles an hour, broadcasting cheerful, futuristic beeps as it zipped all the way around the Earth once every 96 minutes. Our rocket soared to approximately the height of a mailbox, then blew up. On the plus side, our satellite courageously continued transmitting a beacon signal, thereby making itself easy to locate as it lay there on the ground. And I'll stop here to add this personal note, if any families watching. I remember that night, my sister Patsy remembers it better than I do because she was a lot older, as I always remind her. But I was 6.5 at the time. Patsy had just turned 16 a little over a month earlier. And I remember going out into our driveway at 13574 Brook Green Drive in Dallas, the edge of Brook Green, the corner of Brook Green and Coit Road. We were going out into our driveway. And the way I remember it is going to the yard, to the side yard of our driveway. Patsy says we actually laid down on the driveway to look up at it with Mother and Daddy and Patsy and I did. So her memory's probably better on that than mine. But anyway, I remember we saw Sputnik overhead. You could see it with the naked eye. And, it was fascinating. And it was I became a space buff, which I think a lot of us did in my generation, growing up with the space race. The first man into space was Yuri Gagarin of the Soviet Union in April of '61, when I had just turned 10, and a few weeks later, the first American into space, Alan Shepard. So anyway, began a lifelong fascination for me with space. So all of a sudden, the United States didn't look so superior. And as I said, the grown-ups of 1957 were totally freaked out by this. Something had gone terribly wrong. Somebody had completely dropped the ball. And our nation's leaders felt it was time to put the blame where it belonged, on the 5th graders of Whippoorwill School. At least that's how it felt. Suddenly, we students were hearing a lot from our teachers, who were hearing it from the politicians, about how America's young people needed to improve in math and science. Never mind the fact that it wasn't our fault the Russians were winning the space race. We were the ones who were going to receive additional math and science instruction. We were the ones who would be given more homework. We were the ones who would be expected to understand algebra and trigonometry, including something called the cosine, which none of us, I speak for my generation here, have ever really understood the purpose of. Did our nation's leaders, the people who were actually in charge when we fell behind in the space race, did they get saddled with trying to understand the cosine? They did not. They dumped that impossible task onto the 5th graders of Whippoorwill School. And as you can tell, we are still bitter. After Whippoorwill, I attended grades 6 through 9 at Harold C. Crittenden Junior High School, which is still educating the youth of Armonk, now as H.C. Crittenden Middle School. Junior high was an exciting time for me, and by exciting, I mean deeply disturbing. This was because of an experience I had there, an experience I am reluctant to talk about, even to this day, an experience I would not wish on anyone else. Puberty. The worst thing about puberty for me was how long it took to arrive. I was a late bloomer. While one after another of my male classmates started growing taller, speaking in a deeper voice, and sprouting hair in new locations, I was stuck with a slightly larger version of the puny, hairless body I'd been sporting since my Davy Crockett days. And it wasn't just my male classmates who were changing. The girls were undergoing an even more dramatic transformation, which was starkly evident when we returned from summer vacation at the beginning of 7th grade. The girls were no longer girls. They were definitely young women. It was as if they had all attended summer bosom camp. The boys definitely noticed this and were feeling powerful new biological stirrings in the form of semi-permanent boners. A Category 5 puberty storm had hit Harold C. Crittenden Junior High. Waves of hormones were sloshing through the halls. Our social lives were also changing. We were no longer having adult supervised parties with cake and ice cream and balloons and pin the tail on the donkey. Instead, we were having grown-up free parties with slow dancing and holding hands and spin the bottle and kissing and making out, and sometimes, according to rumor, reaching bases. We were passing notes in class. We were going on dates. We were going steady. And when I say we, I mean not me. Here's what I looked like in junior high. You may have an idea now why I'm enjoying this Dave Barry book so much. I can relate to him so much. His story right here is my story. Wow. All right. We're at a little over 20 minutes. I promised I would start keeping these sessions to around 20 minutes. So I think this is a good place to stop for now. Let's see how far we are into this chapter. We're about 10 pages into this chapter. Yeah, it's going to take 3 or 4 sessions to finish this chapter. Oh, there's another 22 pages. A couple more sessions. Anyway, so we'll continue with chapter 2, school, in the next session. Thank you for watching.